Should I go ahead and get started, you think?
Go ahead.
I see that we have a healthy number of participants here. Welcome, everybody, to our session on Toward a More Inclusive Future, Confronting New Urbanism's Reputation. I am Emily Talen from the University of Chicago, and we are joined today by Nathaniel Smith, who is founder and CEO of the Partnership for Southern Equity, and by Andres Duany, who needs no introduction, but he is a founder of CNU. So I'll just start off by saying a few words to kind of frame where we are with this session and what's behind it. And then I'm going to go ahead and let our panelists engage in their conversation. So New Urbanism is the champion of walkable urbanism, but has that quest created a world of exclusion and white privilege? Are communities of color getting left in the dust? Sometimes even suffering displacement. This is a question that Nathaniel Smith has brought to the fore, and we're very, very happy to have him here with us engaging in this conversation. As we pursue our walkable urbanism and kind of claim urban territory, what happens to communities of color and how much do we care about that? We say we're all about diversity, but what are we really willing to do to make that happen? Is New Urbanism guilty of expanding so-called white space at the expense of Black communities? I think that's a really important question to not walk away from. It's fine to champion walkable urbanism, but what if you're pursuing that and people are getting excluded and pushed out? Why is that something to be then proud of? Nathaniel Smith, he has been working to advance what he calls a racial equity agenda, building capacity, protecting against displacement, focusing on a meaningful kind of community engagement, one that truly empowers people. So this is a discussion and kind of a debate, and we do want to have plenty of time for audience participation. But to start things off, I would love to turn the table over to Nathaniel Smith to maybe make kind of an opening statement. Nathaniel?
Well, thank you, Emily and Andres, and as well as the Congress for the New Urbanism for providing an opportunity for my organization to participate in the conversation. I have participated many years ago in CNU, a CNU conversation, and I also love cities a lot, whether it be my undergraduate experience at Morehouse College, where I initially began to love cities, to the work that I do every day to advance an equitable growth, or what we call a just growth agenda in Atlanta and in the American South. So, my comments in particular that I will share really is kind of centered in love, right? And a real commitment to ensuring that as we develop and grow cities, that not only will we have an opportunity to create cities that are and communities that are beautiful, that are walkable, that have their own strong economies, that are resilient and that are regenerative, but we also make sure that the people that were there when those cities were not so beautiful and were driven through, and that people would avoid those particular communities, that those people who were there during the hard times have an opportunity to benefit as well. One of the things that we believe at the Partnership for Southern Equity is, at the end of the day, policy in essence is a reflection of the values of people in power. And that in many ways, our own internalized values that have been really, in our opinion, influenced by white supremacy and structural racism affect everything that we touch, whether it be our economy, whether it be our land use decision making, whether it be our society, and other key aspects of our community that influence the quality of life. of all people, including, of course, our most marginalized and disenfranchised, which are Black people and historically disinvested communities of color. With that being said, I think that the CNU story is a prime example of what happens when good ideas and good intentions are filtered within value, filtered through values that have been influenced again by people in power, and in particular communities that have benefited from white supremacy. You know, it's very similar to the work that is done when more recently when we were moving towards trying to get money out into the community through the PPP funding. You know, putting good money inside of bad systems still created unfortunate results. We know that a small percentage of Black businesses had an opportunity to benefit from those dollars, not because the intent was not positive, but because the values and the systems that the dollars were used, the delivery system that was utilized to get those dollars into communities, were influenced by a history of structural racism and disenfranchisement. And at the same time, the concept of new urbanism and many of the key tenets and commitment to creating more walkable communities in many ways, unfortunately, has been influenced from our perspective from that history of structural racism, which in our opinion has in a subliminal way focused a lot on the preservation and expansion of white spaces. And you talked about that, Emily, right? And even though, of course, again, that may not be an overt commitment from CNU to do it, because the work is not centered in that history and centered in that commitment to advancing racial equity and centered in understanding how structural racism and those unfortunate values of extraction and exploitation can really continue to perpetuate itself. Bad things can sometimes happen as a result of good intentions, right? And so my premise to you all as well is that we have to begin to take a step back and look at how some of the unfortunate harm may have been created in terms of really being complementary to this idea of preserving and expanding white spaces, that the Congress for the New Urbanism could continuously play a part in that. What is the history of that? What are the lessons that can be learned in the past? And even more so, what are the things can be done in the future, especially in light of the very critical moment that we are in the history of not only America, but the world, where structural racism is finally being called out, where multiracial coalitions are finally coming together, where a real conversation about how structural racism continues to perpetuate and permeate within our culture and society. I think that there's a real opportunity for CNU to assess itself and utilize that journey as a way to be an example for other organizations that want to show up in the right way for Black communities and historically disinvested communities of color. And in order to do that, there are key things that need to happen. First, it's important to resist the past and some of the practices that have helped to perpetuate the preservation of expansion of white spaces. We need to reform certain policies that are embedded in CNU's charter and expanding it to really be more inclusive of the racial equity conversation. We also have to create an opportunity where people have to begin to reconcile their history, right? And even more so, how can CNU play a role in actually creating a reparative agenda for those communities that have been disinvested in or disenfranchised or displaced as a result of the work that has been done. So again, I don't want to talk too long, but that is really kind of the premise around the work. And for us, of course, if there, is an opportunity to talk about what does just growth mean, I'm more than happy to do that. But I wanted to make sure, Emily, that I was able to at least provide our context and not just the context and a perspective of the Partnership for Southern Equity as a Southern organization, right, that has focused on advancing a racial equity agenda. But I would submit to you that, and again, I can't speak for anyone else, but I would say that, we're not the only organization, I'm sure, that has asked this question about how can CNU show up in a very different way to advance racial equity.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Andreas, do you want to make some kind of opening remarks?
No, I would like to, well, inevitably, yes, there are some remarks that are opening remarks, but I just want to say that although that might seem to be a big agenda that Nathaniel just presented, it's actually by our standards pretty focused, okay? We're a big organization, extremely decentralized. You know, it's what's called a protean organization that has a core, which is a charter, and then its members, and protean being the god of the ocean, you know, in which, you know, there's a big reservoir of water, but as it moves away from that reservoir of the deep ocean, it adjusts to the shore. You know, the ocean eventually adjusts to the cliffs or to the beaches or to the lagoons, et cetera. So we're a protean organization that has at its core the charter. The charter is definitely, it is concerned about inequity, but not necessarily racial. It's in the sense of diversity always being a good thing, just implied. But the problem with our protean organization is that we are committed to lots of different things. Sometimes I think we're distracted by many things. Currently, for example, there's a huge commitment to climate change, like everybody else. And we're not particularly cognizant of the intersection with equity when we think of climate change. You know, we're thinking just as easily about the poor people in Bangladesh who are being, you know, who are being flooded as the millionaires, you know, on Miami Beach. So it's not that we're distracted, it's just that we're decentralized, but your time has come, you know, just like we've had different concerns over the really three to four decades. Your time has come, and I think that it's being handled beautifully. Actually, the way you're getting attention, I've never seen anything quite like it. It's revolutionary. But I do think that it will pass, because everything passes. I think you have a few years at center stage, and then our culture becomes distracted by the next thing. You know, it's going to be Israel next week, you know?
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I think there's an incredible urgency to what you're saying. I would like to add the sense of urgency. Say, what do we do now? Okay, that gets us excited. And everything passes. There's nothing specific about the racial issue. It's just that people get distracted with the next problem, as it were. By the way, if we do get caught in a recession, you're just in the maelstrom there. You're just one more set of unfortunates, you know, and then you don't get. So I think we need to act. Now, in terms of our organization, there's a lot of overlap in the technology, but we do worry a lot about the suburbs. The fact that they need to be retrofitted, that there's a kind of collapse and an emptiness to these shopping malls that are dying and everything, that it is the source of a lot of dysfunction, a lot of isolation. So we are distracted by that. And I think what you're calling for is not how do we get the Black folk to the suburbs, which in some ways, you know, some people say, well, that's a solution, isn't it? But actually, how do we actually refocus on the neighborhoods that are currently vulnerable in different ways, which you mentioned? I have worked in communities just like the ones that concern you for a very long time. I have, in fact, I was thinking, Nathan, I heard about redlining in college.
Right.
You know, which is 50 years ago. It was very real. And of course, we all think that the red lines have been erased, right? That's the past. I spoke to one of the developers, you know, the one who worked with us in Houston with that minister whose name I don't think I'm at liberty to. I think we know who it is. But he said, oh, Andres, he was here. He happened to be visiting. And he said, Andres, there's all sorts of redlining that has nothing to do with a red line, you know? And I was thinking about what they were. And one of them is that just the sheer difficulty of qualifying for mortgages. You know, they just look at the criteria and they say, well, you don't qualify. You haven't had a job for more than 3 months, you know, or your income isn't enough or whatever, you know. But there's also an additional one, which is even if you do get a mortgage, you still need the income to pay the mortgage.
Mhm.
So that's another thing he brought up. So what I think needs to be embedded is, and insofar as we can do it as urbanists, we need to we need to erase those red lines. Okay, that's one red line that I would like to address. And we may have a couple of proposals that are very interesting that I want to get to. But there's another red line, which is much more problematic. I think you would be amazed how involved we were in inventing the public process in the United States. I mean, right there at the beginning, the charrette, for various reasons, something that we use as an internal method for efficiency became highly politicized. And the problem that I'm having is that, and I'm having it not just because of racial issues, but the ability of people to organize to say no is killing us, just killing us. People don't want change, and change, among the elements of change, is diversity. Like, if we're going to ask people and say, look, we got these really nice Black folk that have been around for generations, and they're ready to create diversity, just like we say, hey, we need to place a school here, or we need to make this road more hospitable to kids and so forth, it's always no. So that is a huge red line. Like, the distortion of the local democratic process is the biggest red line I face. And nobody says it's Black folk, but in the end, that's what they're saying. Okay. And that is a problem that I would wish we could address. Like, how do we make that so it's not something that can be said? Like, you can't say, well, we're not going to meet handicap requirements. You know what I mean? Like, at some point we say, well, handicap requirements are very expensive. No one can say we're not going to do that. And so this idea of diversity is something that we need to figure out, who say that's not on the table. You can't say no to this. You can't say no to affordable housing. You can't say no to racial diversity. It's just not on the table. And I think you can help us to do that. And that would be very helpful.
Yeah.
The third thing, and I want to get back to all of these, and this is, I think, one of the things that I think got us to become interested in each other, is I did work in a Black community once, and I was able to actually establish some technology against gentrification, by controlling the floor area ratio. It was all very technical. And then it turns out that the people in the community said, we want gentrification. We're just regular Americans. Like, we want to profit. He says, our houses will inevitably be sold. And I remember people saying, my kid is off to college. He's not going to come back. When I sell my house, I want $300,000, not $125,000. And so that whole thing that we did achieve technically had to be thrown out. And we said, no. And by the way, that community was gentrified. And the Black community was essentially thinned out desperately. In other words, what you fear actually happened. But they didn't want it. They wanted to profit from the ownership of their house. Now that's separate from rentals, but you know what I mean.
And so, I think that's a really important point. And I think what those communities wanted was neighborhood revitalization, not gentrification, right? And I think that a lot of times people use those terms synonymously, like equity and equality, right? And I think it's our responsibility, and in particular CNU and PSC, to make sure that people have clarity around the difference between the two. And because I think there is an opportunity to revitalize communities in ways that will ensure that the people that are there, one of the big challenges around gentrification is that it is development that is preparing for people to come and for the attraction of new people, not the people that are already there, right? And a neighborhood revitalization agenda takes the people who are already there into account, right? And I think that if we're able to really create that opportunity to really elevate a neighborhood revitalization agenda, or from our perspective, an equitable growth agenda or just growth agenda, I think we'll have a chance to meet the market with meaning, right? And really to make sure that the community is benefiting. The other thing that I just wanted to share, and I know, Emily, you have some questions, is this other piece around, and I really, really am glad that you lifted up this piece around the suburbs. And I noticed that one of our dear friends, Scott Bernstein, is on the call, and Scott was one of the first people to really sit me down and help me understand and learn about regionalism along with some other folks. And one of the real challenges is that the goal can't be exclusively about getting people of color into the suburbs, because traditionally now we're dealing with, like where I'm from in Atlanta, where Atlanta is one of the top cities for the suburbanization of poverty, right? We don't understand or elevate the correlation, right, between placemaking and what is happening in the urban core and its effects on our whole regional dynamic. In places like the city of Atlanta or the Atlanta metropolitan region, we have more poor people who live in the suburbs than in the city, right? A lot of that has to do with land use. And if we look at it from a historical perspective, when we think about the development of our highway system and the utilization of FHA and the GI Bill to create white spaces in the suburbs, right? We're actually seeing the inverse of that right now, right? Where white spaces are being created closer to the urban core, while at the same time, new spaces for communities of color are being created in the suburbs. So if you can't make that correlation and understand, and that is why, for me, I continue to say that is why it is important for CNU to really put this conversation about racial equity at the center of the work through the charter, and even more so create opportunities for folks of color to be involved on the board, right?
What about folks of color being developers?
I think that's a great thing. And we know what happened historically with the community economic development movement, right? I mean, I think that a lot of it dissipated in many ways as a result of political infighting. But at the end of the day, right, the work that and opportunities that you have because of your experience to help support and help to elevate mission-driven developers and for-profit developers of color, in particular Black developers, is something that is very, very beneficial in many, many different ways. But we have to, again, think of opportunities and ways that we can.
Nathan, one of the, I had, I'm not school. I didn't do any school learning. Nobody teaches this stuff in school. I've had aha moments, and one of them was this actually Black council person. A big project was coming into Charleston, big project. And the very elegant sort of Black council person says, look, I'm fine with the big project, but cut it up into little pieces. Because what happens is if you cut it into many small buildings, my people who are subcontractors can bid on it.
Exactly.
If it's a big building, everybody has to come in from Charlotte. No electrician in my neighborhood in Charleston can actually bid on a big project. So I think one of the criteria that we need to have is, yes, there may be some big projects, there's a lot of growth, but they must always be cut up into small increments.
And you know what that speaks to, and this is what I always lift up as well. The challenge a lot of times in urban communities, and in particular in places like Atlanta and other places in the South, I mean, I don't want to speak for other places because we do a lot of work there and I've experienced in other places, but I don't want to be presumptuous and speak for other places. It's not only the need for the increased production of affordable housing, which we all know that there's a definite need for that, but until we understand that the housing delivery system is inequitable, that the housing delivery system is wrought with, how can I say this, reinforcing loops of inequity and structural racism, then again, we're putting good money into bad systems, right? And so again, I think what you're saying is so important, and that is really, again, a place where the housing delivery system can be transformed when that city council person say, hey, we're not going to just give this large, development to one big developer. We want to split it up so smaller, whether it be mission-driven developers or for-profit developers of color can actually learn.
Remember, it's the subcontractors.
Yes.
Developers are pretty, they're an elite, okay? Developers are an elite. They got to. But the subcontractors are regular folk. And so I think it's about getting small bidders to do it. And I think that actually that could easily become criteria for the selection of who the winner is in a public RFP. Like,
That's
what
right.
are the subs that you'll be using? Are they from this area? You can't control the developer so much, but you can control the subs. And
you can actually, and again, this is, don't want to go get too wonkish in the policy discussion, but you can sort of influence the developers through a community benefits agreement, right? I mean, you can actually, through a development agreement between a local jurisdiction and the community,
no, that's what I mean. Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
to influence the developer. But I think there's a whole toolbox that I think we need to explore. But again,
well, one thing that counts, because they do these rankings, they're supposed to be objective, right? Oh, we're going to want to be objective, and then they put too much emphasis on how many times have you done this before?
Right.
Do you see what I mean? It's just incredible. How many times have you done this before? Well, I haven't done it before, but I know how to do it, and that knocks out a lot of people that are starting out.
Right.
So
right.
That would be a very easy thing to write.
Right.
Don't even take that into account. Just how many local jobs, absolutely local jobs, and I mean local from the neighborhood, not locally from the region, is this going to bring to bear? And we'll check on it.
Right.
Guys, can I interject here? There's way too much meeting of the minds going on here. We'll never get anywhere. But can we talk about Hope 6?
Yes.
So Hope 6 is criticized because more units were demolished than were replaced. And CNU's kind of defensive posture about that was that, hey, we had no control over the amount of money that Congress was allocated for public housing. We were just trying to produce some better designs here. And we also, Hope 6 successfully integrated on some level. So my question is, should New Urbanism have refused to have been involved in Hope 6 because of the problems with funding and that people were not properly housed, not enough money was given for public housing, as kind of a matter of principle? Or was Hope 6 an important lesson in how to build public housing a better way? Nathaniel?
Okay. Well, I want to say one thing, just a small correction. It wasn't for us to get involved with HUD. HUD got involved with us.
Sure.
We actually had the idea of Hope 6. I was there from the beginning. And we said, listen, what these people want and where they will thrive is with a different kind of housing. Don't put them in corridors. Don't put them in elevators. Give them yards with fences, with all that Oscar Newman stuff. So the problem is we really didn't take into account that when you take down an apartment building and replace it with houses or townhouses, you lose density. But on the other hand, it's the housing people wanted. So we really were stuck. I'm not sure it was as much money, Emily, as the fact that we intrinsically de-densified as part of the policy to de-densify. And that was our fault. That was absolutely our idea. The money wasn't, but the de-densification was our idea. So,
well, of course, coming from Atlanta, the place where the first, I guess you can say, Hope 6 project with Centennial was initiated by way of the Olympics. I think that, again, it was important for CNU to be engaged in that conversation to ensure that whatever would be developed would be walkable and be connected to the broader aspects of the community. I think what could have been done differently is if CNU could have connected with other partners that would have been sensitive to the blind spots that CNU was sensitive to, and even more so, ensured that there was always a local context and local policy connected to that federal agenda, right? So it's not a problem to develop mixed income housing. The problem is to not also have an inclusionary zoning ordinance attached to the mixed income housing agenda. It's not a problem to make sure that you have a diversity of incomes in one community, but it also makes sense to also connect that to an inclusionary zoning policy, with inclusionary housing agenda that includes an affordable housing trust fund and other key ways, whether it be impact fees and other ways that will ensure that a true run-to-one replacement can realize itself. So it's not necessarily that whether CNU should have been involved in that, is did you have the wherewithal to bring other people along who may have seen the work in a different light because of their mission and their commitment to ensuring that certain segments of the community would not be left behind. And again, that is what this conversation is all about, right? Is that everybody wants beautiful and resilient and strong cities, you know. At least I hope so. The question is, who is going to be around to enjoy them? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that is what the work is all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And regions. I mean,
one of the things that I think CNU was an amazing achievement, actually. It performs better sociologically. There's less crime, but what's more important is a lot more happiness. Mm-hmm. You just go to a Hope 6 and it's just like working. It's a wonderful, that's what human happiness is at a very high level. The problem is, and by the way, regardless of what anybody says in terms of number, 55,000 units were built. Mm-hmm. And Emily, nothing else was built in that decade. It's 55, it could have been 178,000, but still 55,000 got built. And the fact that people say, you guys at CNU don't know anything about affordable housing is ridiculous. We dominated affordable housing in this country for 10 years with that error. And by the way, we were punished for that error, not just now, but the reason actually the project was basically killed is that there was too much reduction of number of units. That's really, when it went up to Congress, that's what the complaint was. Hey, this is, however cool you think this is, we're building less than we're knocking down. So that was a problem that we were punished for. But on the other hand, in terms of human happiness, we increased it. The people who lived, the ones that I visited, including a couple we did ourselves, they're just working. Mm-hmm. In a kind of, a little bit of a white space. You're right. Like, I think some people a lot of whites are horrified by it, actually, not just, it's like, it's too neat, it's too cute, it's too perfect. But nevertheless, people like that stuff. So now, so what I wanted to bring up over and over again is, what do we do now specifically? Because you guys have a lot of, it's your time, right? You have everybody's ear for a while. Mm-hmm. How is it that we can help you in a very precise way? Like, what do you want us to ask for? Mm-hmm. That we can deliver at our level. Right. We're designers and urbanists. We do a little policy, but at our level, what can we do? What should we be asking for?
Well, and I think it's, and I totally understand where you're coming from in terms of, this could be our moment. I think it's really unfortunate, though, that it's always racism's and white supremacy's moment. That we're framing it to say that we have this window of opportunity when structural racism and white supremacy is always present. Mm-hmm. And so this is not a sprint by any means. This is a marathon. Mm-hmm. And the history of liberation started out way before PSC showed up and will continue after we left. Mm-hmm. So I would push back a little bit about whether this is our moment or not, because we wouldn't be here if folks gave up, right? And so I think that there's a lot of work to do. Now, what does it mean for CNU on this leg of the marathon? Because I want you all to really run with us in order to get the baton as close as we can to the finish line for the next generation of people being involved. Mm-hmm. I think there are two key things. You've heard me say this before, that equity is a way and not a what, right? So let's start with that first. Let's start first with what is the way of equity for CNU versus what does CNU do? Mm-hmm. Because I think the change has to begin with CNU first. Mm-hmm. So from the charter's perspective, are things within the charter that needs to be changed in order to put racial equity at the center of the conversation, so people will understand that not just the outcomes associated with structural racism as it relates to the built environment articulated, but the history, right? And what it has created over time also has to be communicated within the context of the charter. So I think a deep assessment of the charter by not only the members of CNU, but also other people that you respect is critical and important. I think also having a deep dive into the organizational structure of CNU. Yes, CNU is a volunteer-based organization, right? But what is the composition of the board of CNU? Is there an opportunity to have more people of color on the board? What is the racial composition of the staff of CNU?
We're putting you on the board, Nathaniel, by the way.
Well, I mean,
stay tuned.
We'll talk about that offline. But is there an opportunity to also be a representation of the communities that we want to see through the board and the staff? I think that's very, very, very important for any organization that is really trying to work to advance racial equity. So that's the other key thing. The third thing is, in my opinion, how can we take the time to actually atone as an organization for the role that CNU could have played or has played, from my perspective, in creating inequitable communities? It's one thing to have this conversation. It's another thing to actually formally say, we had a role in this and we want to play a part in doing better. You know, that is really where the real work has to begin in terms of the restorative work. So it's about restoration, right? And what is the role of CNU in being able to be humble enough to say, we didn't have all the answers, and these are the things that we've learned along the way. How can we find, we're committed to making sure that the next 20 years or 30 years is more equitable and inclusive. And then the last piece is, what does a new agenda, a new charter, a new board, not a new board, but a more inclusive board or more inclusive staff mean within the context of public policy, right? Because we know, right, that there are specific policies that can be initiated that will encourage more equitable communities. And what is the role in CNU in not only recommending those policies, but also advocating for them locally and on the federal level? So for me, again, it's just like, you know, us as men constantly trying to push away from an idea of patriarchy, right? That we're always fighting because we've been conditioned to look at the world from a patriarchal lens. It's the same thing from a white supremacy lens or a lens of white supremacy. White people have to work every day, It's not in the charter. It's not in, it has to work. You have to work every day to ensure that you're sensitive to the history of structural racism and our effects on ensuring or minimizing the opportunity for some people to win and some people to lose. That's a daily proposition. And it's not a monthly or weekly. We have to work on this every day. And so those are kind of the things that I think are great places to start. You know, I am just more than anything thankful that we've had an opportunity to come together and have this real conversation. And that, to me, from my perspective, it seems as if, you know, that there's a real, a genuine embracing of some of the concerns that have been lifted up by PSC. And I know we're not the first organization, so I want to honor the people who've asked hard questions before us. Yeah. But I do think that when you talk about our time is now, you know, in terms of the racial equity movement, you know, maybe so, but I think even more so, it is CNU's time to begin to show up in a different way and to stand up and speak out for racial justice.
I was going to say one thing about our power, which is sobering. I remember a few CNUs ago, Emily or somebody invited some young women of different sexual orientation than me. However cool I wanted to be, they were different. And they said, can't you design public spacing? They were one of the LGBTQ bunch. And I said, can't you design public spaces that are ours? And I say, I know a lot about designing public spaces that are attractive to younger and older people, males and females and so forth. But boy, that's pretty precise. You want a lot of precision there. Like, how do we make a space? And then I answered with what I knew, which is, look, if you're going to build an apartment building and you want it to say, for example, we want this to be a space that is for lesbians, let's say. That was what you wanted. I said, well, what you do is you offer the first and best apartment to the most prominent and illustrious lesbian in the city. And you say, you come here first, and she will actually, that person will actually make it a safe space intrinsically, okay? And developers do that. Like, for example, if they want to do a development that is a hell of a lot of fun, you know, this is gonna be fun here, they will actually sell the first few houses to people who are fun and have a following. Now, that isn't design though. That's just, and that's not even policy. It's just kind of like,
right. It's inside. It's what they choose to do, right? Like,
yeah. And so, for example, we can actually be much, much better at inviting people to come first. You know, say, well, this is what's going to happen here, and we want people of this kind, your kind, their kind, to come in and make it feel safe and attractive to people who are less secure than you about coming in. And for example, that's a technology that's mostly at the level at which we work. We don't work so much at the policy level in Washington, but we know how to get people to do certain things, you know? And that may be, I'm very proud of that, you know, of actually working at a very human level. And that's something that we can actually mutually say.
Right.
You know, okay, so Nathan, like, who's the coolest jazz musician you know? And that will attract other people who are artists, you know, help us with this. And that's not a very big policy, but it's a very interesting technique as an example, you know? Many people think that we're more powerful than we are, that we're a combination of Stalin, that's gonna make people move in and out, you know, and Jesus Christ, we're gonna make everybody moral, you know? I wrote something about that today. Who do you think we are? That we're gonna create a moral America, plus get people to move around as if we could order them around? Sorry, we can't do that. Can we just get a little more modest about our power? And it's funny, because I do feel that after 50 years of, actually 40 of doing this, that we're much less powerful than we think. You know, we lose control of things very, very easily. It's the nature of urbanism to do that.
But, you know, Nathaniel brought up the point about CNU being somewhat complicit in structural race or inequity in land use planning, and unequal investment and white spaces and people getting displaced and pushed out and all kinds of unintended consequences of the investments and the design decisions that CNU has supported. So do you think that CNU should officially admit some level of complicity in some of these problems?
Insofar as it's accurate, because otherwise it's meaningless. I remember, Emily, that 15 years ago, okay, we were asked to come into cities to gentrify them. Okay, it was exactly the opposite. We came in and said, this city ain't got a tax base. Nobody loves this city. The city's empty. And I actually honed my skills making cities attractive. I was of the Richard Florida generation, okay, and I knew very well how to make downtowns attractive. And I have to admit that, which is now called gentrification. You know, when I first started getting feedback on this, which was maybe just 5 or 6 years ago, I was absolutely amazed. I said, what do you mean? I thought you wanted to have a tax base. And you may remember even Carol Coletta, you know, about 3 or 4 CNUs ago. She said, she was a fantastic, incredibly wise person. And she made, she was in one of the plenaries, she said, if there are 100 cities in the United States, or 95, she said 85 of them need gentrification. Do you remember her saying that? Because it was like, whoa, because we're talking about the successful cities, this, you know, the Atlantas, the Miamis, the San Franciscos. But, you know, you just leave a little bit to the second tier cities and they can't even pay the taxes.
But you know what though, Andres? I think that, again, it's about language. It's about gentrification versus neighborhood revitalization.
Right.
It's about cost, how a cost is defined versus how a benefit is defined. It's about what is considered an asset and what is considered a liability, which is all kind of influenced by what we know and what we don't know. Yes, you know, all communities want to create markets that create opportunity for everyone. But it's really unfortunate that many markets are influenced by where white people choose to live.
Yeah.
Right. It is unfortunate. It is unfortunate that when people say that they want communities to be gentrified, that there's not a ancillary conversation around what is the history of redlining, what is the history of highways, what is the history of white flight because of the integration of public schools in urban areas. How has that played a role in minimizing markets in these communities, and how a lot of that fundamentally has been influenced by structural racism, right? And the history of white supremacy. Like, these are things that have to come with that conversation. And of course, I'm not expecting for you to come in there and bring that perspective.
No, but I think we can do things.
But when people, one more thing, and I'll be quiet. I think that when people are saying we want gentrification, what they're really saying is we want our communities to be looked at as valuable, like it is everyone else's.
Right.
That's what they're saying.
Well, there's a few things. For example, there's one thing that I'll say, Emily, we have a surprising number of schools in our communities. We DPZ, our firm, actually didn't get enough credit for that. They're all public. Even at Seaside, they're all public schools. You know, they're not private schools, which is the easy thing to do, as you know. Oh yes, give them a piece of real estate, they'll be happy to come. They're all public schools. But here's something that I think is one of the first things. You know, part of our theory is that you should be able to that it is a human right to get to your ordinary daily needs without needing a car. Ordinary daily needs, you know? The first thing these communities need is a decent market.
Right.
Right, I mean, absolutely, day one, they can't feed themselves. So why can't we, and probably a transit stop, okay? We can do that. Like, that's something that we can do that's extremely practical to do and would really benefit the communities. And that's the kind of thing that we say, okay, CNU, just remember that damn market, okay? There's half a dozen things that communities need as a civil right, the right to live without a car.
Right, and that's revolutionary. I mean, I believe that's a revolutionary assertion, right? And it's critical, and I'm thankful that CNU is lifting up that assertion of proclamation, because we need that. But
well, we're not doing it yet.
Right.
It's kind of floating around, but that's something that we can do almost immediately because it's actually implied in the charter.
Right.
And we say we have to stick to this one, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, though, that there are opportunities to go back to this important conversation. Emily, I know you have some good questions for us, and so I want to be quiet, but I do think that we need to begin, and CNU, I think, is a good place to do it, to unpack these code words that we utilize in the planning and development space. Market is one of those words, right? Because when we say we want the market to enter into a community, what are we saying, Andres? We're saying we want white folks to come into the community.
Wait a minute, the market, like as in a supermarket?
No, the market.
I meant the supermarket. I meant a supermarket.
Yeah. I know. I knew what you were saying, but I'm talking about the big market, right? Yeah. That when people we want the market to return in this community, a lot of times they're talking about white folks.
You're absolutely right.
Right. So again, we've got to be more sophisticated in understanding how sometimes we use language and words that actually help to perpetuate, again, the creation of these spaces that aren't inclusive. And so, again, I think CNU, it provides a great opportunity to have that conversation with folks that may not have been in a position to have those conversations before.
So what do you do with the fact that CNU is out there advocating for these walkable, transit served, school enabled communities, and we live in a Western capitalist democracy where that means the market, and that means that there's going to be people pushed out. Not everybody's going to have that holy grail of a community. What do you do with that?
Emily, there's a difference. That is the market, but that's the market that yields profit. It's not the market. It's the market that yields profit. And what developers will say, sure, but we can't, even our holy John Anderson, you know, our sainted developers, our very best developers say, sure, that's the right thing to do, but I got to make a living. And by the way, these people are not making a great living. They're really very much committed to things. And I think that's the problem. The problem is that, yes, there's a market that can be readily identified in the United States. We have 67 market segments when we do an analysis, and then a bunch of them get chopped out because no one can make a living off them. So that's the problem. We know where the market is. It's just like, how do we get these people to do what? I don't even know what to ask. Like, to pay enough?
No. This is about the public sector stepping in to.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
Ahead, Nathaniel.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Well, I believe that, I was reading The Economist, and not to tarry too far from our conversation, but there was this whole piece around, oh my God, the private sector is now being involved in issues around social justice. What do we do? What does capitalism do? When we know historically that the private sector has always been involved in public policy, right? But now all of a sudden it's a bad thing because the private sector is concerned about our democracy, that they're concerned about racial equity. But when other groups like ALEC were being invested in and supported by the private sector, that was okay, right? And it's the same thing about development. Developers have always had to depend on government in some way to be successful, whether it be around infrastructure improvements around their developments, or whether it be about, tax increment financing or enterprise zones or opportunity zones. So for us to even frame it as if developers don't need government in order to be successful is laughable from my perspective, and not laughing at you, but I think that it's not just about how does government show up. It's about, is government willing to do whatever it takes to ensure that the people that invest in these development opportunities are actually working to ensure that the people that invest through public finance in those developments get an equitable return on their investment.
Okay,
while at the same time, we're working to ensure, right, that those developers have an opportunity to in some way make the numbers work in a way where the lessons that can be learned from that process will also create revenue for them, while at the same time create a new forward towards a development that is more inclusive and more equitable. I think it's possible.
Well, I want to agree with you. Even it's amazing. I want to add to what you're saying. Okay, first of all these techniques that you just mentioned, the infrastructure paid for, the tax breaks and all that. I remember about 20 years ago when I first heard of them. After practicing 20 years, okay, then suddenly I heard it first time, and then I heard it again, and then I heard it every time. And now no one can do anything unless they get government subsidy. And what they are is the government offers it, and actually the capitalists co-opt it.
Right. And we know too that the biggest developer of affordable, and not to cut you off, but the biggest vehicle for the development of affordable housing right now are low-income housing tax credits.
Well, yes, right. But the developers are not delivering to racial anything. Okay, they're just not. I know those guys.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And they don't need it.
Right.
Because development makes money. It's just that once the government offered it, they co-opted it because they're smart. They're smart as hell.
Yep.
So the question is, what does government ask in return, other than presumably somebody paying taxes? Because that's what the deal is. I'll pay for all these roads and all these things, and you give us a little more taxes that you wouldn't have made. They don't ask for actually any kind of racial diversity.
Yep.
As a condition, as a precondition of this help.
Right.
This help is all over the place. Sometimes, younger people like you think it's always been thus. It hasn't. This is I've always found this to be a scandal. Like, why do you need government help when you're doing a for-profit development? Oh, because we can get it.
Right.
Got to ask for something in return.
Yep. And I think that's the big question, and that kind of speaks to a lot of the work that we do around advocating for equitable public finance. At its most basic level, it is when these dollars are used to build stadiums, when these dollars are used to build things like the Beltline in Atlanta, when these dollars are used to subsidize, infrastructure, are the people. Because the public financing strategies are usually focused in disinvested communities in order for them to work, right? but are those people actually getting a return, an equitable return on their investment? I mean, to me, at a most basic level, I don't think government, local government, is even asking that question.
They don't know what to ask for.
Right. I totally agree.
And I'll tell you, one of the problems is that there's a huge consultant class, huge, that actually is now dedicated entirely to getting hold of those funds. That's how they make a living. And you can go to whole conventions in which 1,000 people show up on and people lecture on how they can actually grab the pot of money and bring it to the private sector. So that, I think we need to bypass that whole system. It's what we call suckerfish, people that are hooked onto the shark, of the funding, and they deliver it. And it's amazing, and it's been growing like crazy. It's disgusting, actually.
Well, the sad news is we're beginning to see that in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space as well. So any opportunity that you have to make money, I mean, there are a lot of people that'll latch on to it and try to find.
They're not working; they're just brokering.
Right.
They're contributing nothing, actually. No, that's.
Well, you guys can disparage government all you want, but we need.
We need government. I mean, we definitely need it, and I think that we're going to need, and that's why, this current administration is encouraging to me, in that they understand that there is a role for government. I mean, one of the major.
Emily, let's go back to, like, for example, I've tried to do a couple of things. I've designed a couple of parks in my life that were on the waterfront, and one of them had a pool. I was telling you, Nathan, one of them had a pool for kids, for little kids, not the big fat COVID adults, but the cute little kids that aren't getting to the beach. Well, it's next to a Black community. So they did everything except they killed the pool, because we knew who would use that. And then there was another one in Mississippi in which it was a couple of baseball fields, and they killed the baseball fields and said, why are you killing it? What else are you putting in charge? Oh, we don't want baseball. Well, that was racism. They knew who would play baseball. So the problem is that it was overwhelmingly in the public process of public participation, presumably the democracy, that's what everybody wanted. So what do we do about the public process? Because we have deified the public process. What does the public want? Well, my opinion, these days, the public wants the wrong thing more often than not. They are racist. Okay, so what do we, who invented the public process, and we really did, Nathan, trust me. I hate the idea that we did, but we did. Okay, now it's just, it's preventing us from doing not only equity, but mixed use,
right,
higher density, walkability. It's just preventing everything we want. We've created a monster that is actually arrayed against everything that we want, that the CNU stands for. And we as the CNU, frankly, are not willing to actually really criticize how the wheels came off this. Don't want to deal with it, because it's holy. It's the holy grail, the public process. It used to work before the internet, social media took over and manipulated the hell out of it. So we have a problem. I mean, internally, even if you hadn't come along, we had a problem anyway. You're attached to that problem now. We can't get it done if we ask the public. So Emily, tell me about that.
No, it's true. But Nathaniel, how do you square that with the basis of your agenda? Seems to me to be all about participation and empowerment and getting people at the table. So how do you square that?
Well, I think from our perspective, it's not necessarily about dismantling the participatory process as it relates to the public. It's about working to provide the agency for people who aren't usually around the table to actually have a chance to participate. It's not about limiting the process. It's about growing the tent of folks who are positioned to be involved in these robust conversations. I'll give you a prime example of the work that we're doing through the support of a couple of foundations, is to actually develop something in our city, and hopefully we'll be able to translate it in other places around the Southeast, called Development Watch. And basically what we're working to develop is a neighborhood watch, a grassroots neighborhood watch effort for developers and development in communities that are being gentrified. training those individuals in the same way that local communities are organizing around public safety. We hope to actually help to organize communities around growth and development and public finance.
To participate in the public process.
Participate in the so if you know what it means when a zoning hearing is taking place and someone is there, or when when somebody is submitting some plats for development and to go into, or to know what the process is around development, it demystifies it and encourages people to get more involved in the process. So through the support of a couple of foundations, we're really using Atlanta kind of as a learning lab for Development Watch. And hopefully through our work, we'll be able to translate Development Watch around the Southeast. But I think that is really where the opportunity is. It's about making sure that the people are positioned for the development to happen with them and not to them. And there are too many people, in my opinion, that where development is happening to them because we haven't necessarily taken the time to reach out to those people and really position them to show up in a forceful way with organizations like CNU, right? And other organizations that are sensitive to the patterns of growth and development. So I do, and so that is where I think there's an opportunity to really, while at the same time support it, because I do think it's like Robert's Rules of Order. I think that some people use the public participation process to ensure that their voices are heard. So there are some structural things that need to be developed, but we cannot walk away, from my opinion, from the importance of the people's voice, right? And ensuring that all people's voices are at the table, but we've got to work hard to ensure that happens.
Guys, there's a lot of really interesting questions coming in, and I want to ask this one of Nathaniel. Chris McCahill asks, Nathaniel challenged parts of the charter in his opening statement. I'd like to hear more. And that's a really good question, because did you have a chance to read the charter?
Oh yeah, I mean, okay. I had a chance, but I'm not gonna. Well, so I'm not gonna give the milk away. I think there's a need to have a more in-depth conversation, but I'll provide a couple of teasers as it relates to, some of the things that I think are important to lift up. One is, and I'll really communicate this through questions rather than affirmative kind of assertions. How passive is the charter about the role of racism, not race, but racism, in helping to facilitate inequitable growth and development in our cities? Another question that I think is really important is, acknowledgement of how racism has played a role, which is really which is very, very important. And I think even more so, the value proposition, and again, I don't want to get too specific, but this conversation around dedicating ourselves to reclaiming our homes, like reclaiming your homes from who? These are questions that I think are very important to ask and understand. So I'm very, very clear about where the opportunities are to change the charter. I just think that it requires a deeper conversation, and also a conversation that is a lot more robust than a 1 minute response.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially since I can't remember the charter, so yeah, I got to read it myself. Right.
Well, it's interesting to me. It's too long. There's 27 principles, and there's a lot of overlap, but at the same time, it's missing some key things.
So I'll be specific with one thing, which I think is really important. So there's some rub. There's rub in the charter, in that for one part of the charter to say that that racism has played a role in creating some of the challenges that communities face, but at the same time that people should respect historical patterns, precedents, and boundaries. That is a real rub, because if you're respecting the historical patterns, precedents, and boundaries, you're actually saying that you're respecting the role that white supremacy plays in development and growth in neighborhoods. So you can't do both. You can't do both.
Mm-hmm.
How do you reconcile that, Rub? Mm-hmm. So just some things to think about.
That's a very good one, actually, because what we had, I mean, I'm thinking of the mind, what we had in mind were people who were actually trying to break up the viable neighborhoods with high rises. Do you see? It was another enemy,
right?
You know, that was an insensitive way to put it, but that's what it was. Actually, I hadn't even noticed that one.
And that's the thing, you know, if you have other people at the table, like when you gave that Hope 6 example, I'm sure, you know, if you would have had someone like a Carl Anthony, right, or Angela Glover Blackwell or other people, you know, I was just a pup at that time, but still running behind people like, you know, Scott Bernstein and Myra Orfield. I mean, those people may have said, well, wait a minute, you know, is it about respecting historical patterns, or is it about acknowledging the history and trying to create new patterns of opportunity through a new urbanist agenda? Like, so there are different ways there are ways to look at it. I think you all have an opportunity to really do.
That's interesting, because the historical precedent piece is really about human scaled urbanism. It's more medieval than it is, you know, 20th century or 19th century US. And it's about certain universals about good quality urbanism, about things like streets shouldn't be too wide and buildings should meet the street, and, you know, that there are these certain qualities of urbanism that kind of transcend or apply to humans no matter who they are. Does that resonate with you, Nathaniel?
Well, not really, because we also had fiefdoms in medieval days as well, you know.
Nathaniel, speaking of
didn't necessarily. Go ahead.
Okay, one of the things that is clear to me and astonishing, for example, I'm Cuban. I live in Miami. We have every Hispanic here, and it's amazing how we don't mix. Okay, and not only do the Cubans not mix with the Venezuelans, but when my sister has a party, the people in Havana don't mix with the people from Santiago. You just have a different sense of humor. You see what I'm saying? So there is a kind of comfort with your own kind, and then that's one of the things that I find most difficult to break up.
Right.
You know, like there's a bunch of folk that just like each other.
Right.
And which actually works against diversity, as you can imagine.
Well, it works against our nation as well. I mean, that is the problem that we have right now. I mean, everybody's watching shows that reinforce what they believe.
Well, it isn't just that people dislike each other, which is the implication of racism. The more curious problem is that people like their own kind. It's the obverse.
Right.
And frankly, I'm stumped when that happens. You know, when my sister's party ends up with Havana people on the left and Santiago people on the right, and the Venezuelans are down the street, you know, and so on. And that is a reality. That's one of my realities. Things end up that way. I'm designing a college town now. And by the way, it's close to Tuskegee. You know?
Yep.
It's Auburn. Tuskegee's right down the street. And Tuskegee has an architecture school. And I'm going to try to get the Tuskegee kids to come over and participate at the Tuskegee architects.
That'd be great.
Let's see how that goes. You know, because they may actually, who knows how that's going to go. But I'm trying, you know, and we'll just see how it goes. There's certainly plenty of Tuskegee students living in Auburn, curiously, because it's kind of more fun, you know, and probably it's class oriented rather than race oriented. You know, we're college kids and it's more fun here than there. So that's another reality, which is the way class cuts across race and everything else very strongly. And it's hard to do that, to actually cut across what people prefer.
Right.
So what should be our goals with respect to integration? You know, is the goal to put Black and white people together in the same neighborhood?
Yeah.
Or is the goal really more about giving people equal access to the good stuff, to public amenities and services? Because these are really different goals. You know, is it about equalizing access, or is it about we really want a world where there's racial integration at the neighborhood level?
Very finely grained,
Yeah, I mean, and I think that is really where the problem is. I mean, one of my heroes, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was a native of Atlanta and also a alumni of Morehouse College, which is the same school I had an honor of participating in. Before he died, talked about a values revolution, right? That we need a revolution of values. So for me, it's not about whether we need to be pushing for these particular outputs like integration. The question is, should we elevate our values to the level where we are using as a compass a belief that all people bring value to communities, right, and everyone is an asset and no one is a liability, right? That all children are precious and all children deserve to live in safe, good housing. All kids deserve a good education, and that people should have the mobility that they need in order to reach their full potential. That's a different conversation, right? And I think that if we continue to focus on outputs and not begin the process of thinking through again, and I said this earlier, that values are just, that policy is just a reflection of the values of people in power.
So what you're saying is that statement of values, you're approving of that. Do I understand that as a basis?
What I'm saying is that we need a values revolution in the land use and development lexicon, right? Mm-hmm. We need a values revolution in the South. We need a values revolution in America. I didn't say that. I didn't come up with that. There were people who were way smarter than me, but how does that actually translate, for example, in CNU's charter, right? How does that translate in how we engage communities? We have our own approach that we call value-based organizing, because we understand that how powerful values are as it relates to move the work. So again, I'm not necessarily saying, Emily, that it's not important, right, to have clear and defined outputs and inputs, but that should never be the driver, in my opinion, of where we are trying to go. Those are just destinations. The real power lies in the compass, right? And how are we taking the time to develop a compass that will ensure that we get to the proper destination? And I don't think that we've really taken the time to develop and cultivate that.
But isn't this how we've gotten ourselves into trouble? Like, we have these state value statements in the charter about how we value diversity and inclusion, and there's that kind of language, but we have allowed ourselves to just build away without really understanding whether we're getting there. Mm-hmm. And we're not getting there, and and we're creating these white spaces, and we're pushing people out with our good design, and not really coming to terms with that very well.
Right. Well, I would just say, Emily, that, the question is, who is in the room, right, when these charters are developed, right? And when you have diversity, right, an increased level of diversity in these rooms that are actually co-designing these statements of values and principles, then that's when the good sausage making occurs, right? Like good policy, right? It's about making sure that, and that's where the inclusion work comes in, to ensure that people from different perspectives and points of view are at the table. Because I believe then, because if you're not careful, that is when kind of the groupthink thing occurs, right? Where people and kind of a coalescing around a set of shared values that may be consistent with a certain point of view or a certain experience or a certain community or lifestyle, right? And I think that the way to push back against that is to try to make sure that the rooms that are in this co-creation, that in the co-creating kind of process, are as diverse. Not just in class but race, but for racial equity people, we look at class and race as like buy one get one free. Like you can't, you really can't talk about class, the history of class in America, without talking about race and vice versa. So I think that there's an answer to that, Emily. And I think it really boils down to, seeing you in other communities, commitment to reaching out towards communities that aren't usually providing an opportunity to be in those rooms where those.
I have to say, we can reach out, but they're not. What we have to do is actually make the places comfortable.
Yes,
different.
I totally agree.
Because they will show up and they're uncomfortable.
I totally agree.
Because it's just different culture, and it's a completely alien environment. Like, how do you even get up to talk? What do who's up there, and why are they sitting higher than me? That kind of thing. I see it all the time. I'm often uncomfortable myself. I understand it takes me a long time to, and I'm a tough guy, but it takes me a long time to adjust to what's going on. What is this society here?
But there's one thing that we learned as Southerners, and that is hospitality, the power of hospitality. Right, as Southerners, and again, I can't speak for all Southerners, but I was raised to work hard to make everyone feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Even in an uncomfortable environment.
Yeah.
I think that we have to understand the power of hospitality as it relates to inclusion and providing folks a place or opportunity, at least feel as if they belong. But again, it's our willingness to be as hospitable as possible, and even more so. One of the things I truly believe is that, the bridge between love and action is empathy.
Yeah.
And so, how do you use empathy as that bridge between love and action? And I think that, again, there's an opportunity to leverage both being hospitality and empathy as a point of departure around ensuring that more.
I use that word a lot, empathy. And and by the way, empathy is not necessarily a principle.
Exactly.
It's because principle, no, it's a completely different filter. I was going to say, I forget now though. Then my favorite guy was the black police chief in Charleston. Do you know who I'm talking about? He died a little while ago. He was brilliant.
I remember him, but I didn't know him.
There's a fantastic book.
Yep.
And he died. He died of cancer not so long ago. And he said, it's not enough to make a city safe. It has to be comfortable for everybody.
Exactly.
And that's the first time he said, no, safe isn't enough. What do we do to make it comfortable? And he was talking about streets. Because sometimes when a street is just too neat, which is in some ways our specialty, it's too neat. When you say white spaces, I don't want to let that go by, okay? That white spaces isn't a metaphor, or it could be. It's a physical damn thing. Like if it's a white space, you're not comfortable.
Yeah, it's real. I'm not saying that to be philosophical, and I appreciate you saying that, because it's not a metaphor.
Yeah.
We're really talking about the use of public policy and finance as a way to expand and protect white.
I don't think we're sufficiently adept, and actually other people are, but the new urbanists are not. We really are specialists in white space. Okay, we know how to make it beautiful and photogenic and neat to be in. And if you look at our renderings, there's not everybody's comfortable. In fact, I think most New Yorkers wouldn't be comfortable, most urban New Yorkers, in our spaces, and they let us know too. But it is, I think we have, Emily, and this is something we can learn. There are those people out there in California that have done a very good job with the Latin people in LA. Do you know that professor at Berkeley, the woman, not McDonald, she's good, okay? I have a couple of books about ordinary spaces and about ethnically adjusted spaces so that people are comfortable.
Right.
You know that in some places, the chain link fence, I was telling you this, Nathan, the chain link fence is the upgrade. Not, and the picket fence is the down.
The gate with the code, with the serial code, right? Yeah. That's the upgrade.
The picket fence is the downgrade, and we have to be, we have to learn that. We certainly know that when we design white spaces, we're really good at it. We have specialists, I don't want to give any names, but we're expert at white spaces. I think the Hispanics in LA have done a very good job with Latin space, and we need to understand more about Black space. What, and I'm not demeaning anybody. People hang around differently.
Right.
They stand differently. We all know that, but we don't know enough about it. And we need to find out where that literature is.
Yeah. And I think also that we also, and again, Emily, to go back to your thoughts around medieval architecture, that there was actually architecture that's older than medieval architecture, right? I mean, architecture of the East, right?
Yeah.
One of my heroes, again, and I invoke Carl Anthony's name, who was also an architect, got pushed back when he was in architecture school because he studied the architecture of Mali, the architecture of other African civilizations that were also in many ways new urbanists. They were walkable, they were centered, they had public centers and all of these other things. So we have to be willing to attack even how we're learning what the schools are teaching people about where these opportunities come from.
By the way, I was
okay. Now you're sounding like a modernist, though,
No.
Nathaniel.
Well,
you'll get skewered at CNU.
Well, I mean, how modern are ancient civilizations? I don't know. It almost sounds like.
But can I just ask, guys, as you're bringing all these people to the table and opening up, what it means to have good urbanism, and let's have everybody's voices be heard. At what point do you lose sight of the agenda here? I mean, pretty soon people are saying, I want my single family house on a 1 acre lot, and that's my voice, that's my vision, but we're trying to be inclusive and keep it all in there. So pretty soon you've lost that nugget of core truth about urbanism that you were trying to promote.
Pretty soon, very soon you do.
Yes. Well, but I think the hard question is, if we're really being honest, is CNU actually inclusive right now?
I think we have methodological problems beyond the charter.
So my whole point is
our methods do not necessarily lead to what you're looking for.
Right. So it's not an indictment again against what the outcomes are and the belief system and the principles that connect folks. It is, can we actually create an environment where more people have a seat at the table in a way that can energize a segment of the population, that in a way that they can see CNU as a vehicle, right, for their voices to be heard and their voices to influence not only the destination but also the journey. But again, I think that there are, I'm not really and I guess that's just kind of the way that we look at the work. For me, I'm not as concerned about, we got to be really careful about this idea about preserving a way of doing things.
Nathan, let me make an example, because we talked about this and I think you were pretty amazed when I told you this story. So we did this big project for important, intelligent Black minister in Houston. And it was big. It was a big project. And we did the usual new urbanist, really great stuff. We did houses with porches. And we made 6, by the way, with some Black developers, everything, right? We made with subsidy, okay? And we made houses with porches. Not a single one sold. Mm-hmm. And we say, what's the matter? He says, well, we the Black people of Houston, associate porches with poverty. That's actually inner city. In Atlanta, by the way, you told me it was different.
It's very different and that's the Southwest. I know where I'm from and where some of my other people are from. They love porches. So
well, in Houston, it's an earlier. Right. It's a cultural thing, and they didn't want the porches. And so we said, why aren't they selling? We eventually figured out what they wanted was ranch houses with garages in front. The very opposite of CNU policy. And so our wonderful developer client shut it down, pretended it was bankrupt, opened it again with new flags, with ranch houses with garages in front. And he said he only has 11 houses left to sell now. He sold hundreds. You see, and that's where we made people uncomfortable, by not having empathy, by not really understanding. And you can't even generalize, because as you told me, in Atlanta, which is probably has a Black community that's much more advanced in Houston, they now think porches are cool. I get it. That eventually that happens. So we have to be very careful about our doctrines and our dogmas. We have to really see, where are people at? What makes them comfortable?
And for the record, Andres, you know, I want to protect you from what you said. You did not hear from me that Black folks in Atlanta are more advanced than Black folks in Houston.
No.
And Andres didn't mean that. What he was just saying, that I think what he was saying is that, you know, that we have a different perspective, the same way that folks in Houston have a different but you know, I just want to make sure I save you from
no. But I think we have to be frank. Like, for example, we can work about China.
Yeah.
But China, for a long time, didn't want any Chinese architecture. You know, they just wanted it all demolished, and they wanted to do Western stuff that looked like Orange County, California. And now they're coming around. So, you know, it's a later phase of development. You know, they understand that their own places are actually very
right. Well, that's the whole thing about suburbanization, right? I mean, if you look at after white flight, you had Black flight, right? You had Black folks who wanted to move into the suburbs because they felt as if the suburban communities were places that were better than their own communities. And then when they went to the suburbs, then those folks went back into the cities, right?
But
so,
exactly,
you know, so again, you know, it's a matter of,
well, you know, that kind of thing, Nathan, that kind of thing is absolutely in our toolkit. You know, there are a bunch of things that are not in our toolkit, some policy things that you're better at and so forth. But there's a whole lot of things. That's why I think we're compatible. There are many things. We have overlapping but not identical toolkits, you know, like, you know, we're physical designers, you know, and we can actually make places that, and I keep going back to this, we make places that can make people happier.
Right.
That is a test, you know, not just, hey, equity, but are you happy there? I mean, do you like living here? That kind of question, I think we've lost track of. And we're doing things like measuring carbon and measuring all sorts of other things, and not necessarily actually making sure that people are content. You know?
Can I just say one thing before we go? Because I know we're going to run out of time. And I just wanted to say one thing, Emily, because I think it's really important for this conversation. You know, when we are having conversations about white spaces or Black spaces, we're not talking about the color of a community's skin. When I talk about Black spaces and white spaces, what I am talking about is whiteness and Blackness as a political construct, right? That Blackness in essence is a political construct, the same way like race is a political construct. We know that from our, you know, from research that all of us are pretty much the same, but the color of our skin has been used to create a political economy and a power system that has benefited one community or another. So when we talk about white spaces, where does whiteness look with in the terms of the political construct of whiteness and how it has influenced growth and development? Now that construct has manifested itself in a negative way towards people that have a lot of melanin in their skin, Black folks. But we all have to understand that when we talk about race, that race and racism are all a political construct. And so, you know, I just wanted to make sure that we didn't get caught up in, oh, are we talking about, you know, communities that are just 100% Black folks or 100% white folks, because we still have a system of racism that is affecting all of us, that is really grounded by and really anchored by this idea of race as a political construct. So I just wanted to, because I saw some feedback from some folks around, and I just want to make sure I clarify myself.
Thank you, Nathaniel. That's a really good point. And we are totally out of time. I want to thank, first of all, the folks who offered their questions, and I'm so sorry we weren't able to get to them all. Nathaniel, thank you 100 times for being here and offering your perspective. We are super grateful for that. And you're going to be in charge of the Charter Amendment Committee. We are not going to let you go. You are going to have to be part of CNU. We need you. Andres, it's always a pleasure to engage and debate with you. So thank you, everybody. Sorry we have to sign off. We'll be in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.